Meeting called to order, 5:04 PM.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 15th, 2026 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. As a courtesy to others, please silence your cell phones and any other noise-making devices. I have a few reminders regarding public comments this evening. Interpretation services will not be provided this evening because our board member who requires interpretation is absent. If you would like to address the board, please submit a request to speak card to the assistant clerk before the agenda item is announced. If you wish to speak on an item not listed on the agenda or on the consent calendar, you may do so during public forum. Please refer to the Rent Board meeting agenda for the list of items or to the agenda items open for public comment sheet, which is posted above the table in front of the chambers. The first item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is the roll call. May I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Height,
Here.
Board Member Willis,
Here.
Chair Tipton,
Here.
Executive Director Fred Tran,
Here.
and General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, Board Member Espinoza and Vice Chair Cantor is absent. The next item on the agenda is Statement of Conflict of Interest. Are there any? Okay, hearing none, the next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, actually, for item F4, can you please have that pulled so we can discuss briefly?
So item F4, you want it removed to be heard where? After?
Actually, it could be heard before item H1.
Okay, so we're going to move item F4 to be heard before item H1.
Correct.
Okay. You take a vote? You want me to vote? Okay, all right. So to the members of the public, if you're here to speak on item F4, it's been moved from consent calendar to be heard before item H1, and that is after the appeal hearing, after item G1. All right, the next item on the agenda is public forum. Tonight, we have 6 speakers. Each speaker they'll be allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board. When your name is called to address the board, please state your name and city of residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. The first speaker is Mr. Cordell Handler.
So, good evening, Chair Tipton, board members. I am Cordell Hendler, and I'm a Richmond resident. So, I have 4 things to say for you today. So, number 1, coming up on July 28th, you are all invited to the Richmond Chamber of Commerce's breakfast at Richmond Main Street Initiative. And our speakers for that meeting, we will have AC Transit, BART, and Amtrak. They're going to be talking to us about transportation initiatives. So, but you do have to RSVP online. So it's $15 if you're not a member, and they have coffee and pastries too in the morning. So coming up 2 days after that, on the 30th, you're all invited to the Mega Mixer at the Pleasant Hill Community Center. It's from 4 to 6 p.m. and tickets are only $20 if you're not a member. But for me, I get in for free since I'm a chamber member. And there will be some more goodies there too, like some appetizers. That's two, and then let's see. Because the third item, I looked at the minutes from the last month's meeting, and I don't have no problem with it. I think it came out perfectly, so without interpretation. So that's three. And then number four is the last, if you recall at the last meeting, I had mentioned about staffing, because once again, I looked at the org chart and I'm thinking like, maybe having a deputy director would be ideal, because just in case the executive director is not present, that person will be the acting director until he returns. So, matter of fact, I'm willing to request to have that agendized for next month's meeting, and that's all I have to say.
So we have a correction to the amount of speakers for public forum. It will be 3, including Mr. Hindler. The rest of the speakers want to speak on item F4, so we moved them to there at that time. The next speaker is Arturo Gonzalez. Care? I think I said your name correct. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
You have 4 minutes to address the board.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm here to raise concerns regarding the processing of a rental registration for a newly completed ADU. My concern is not the requirement to register rental units. I fully support complying with the city requirements and have consistently done so. My concern is the complete lack of transparency and communication after I timely submit a complete registration package. The city staff informed me that my registration could not be completed due to an internal issue involving the city IMS system and that an IT request has been submitted. Since then, I have not received writing confirmation that my registration is considered compliant as of the date I was submitted. I have received no estimate time on completion date. My written follow-up questions have gone unanswered. My file remains pending for reasons entirely outside my control. As property owners, we are required to timely register our rental units and pay annual program fees. In return, we should reasonably expect timely communication, transparency regarding delays, and a reliable administrative process. I respectfully request that the Commission review whether current procedures adequately protect members to the public when internal system issues prevent timely processing of registrations. Thank you. I also request clarifications on the following. Is there a policy that establishes how long a completed rental registration may remain pending due to an internal city system issue? Number 2, when the delay is caused entirely by the city internal systems, is the property owner considered in compliance as the date the completed registration was submitted? Number 3, who is responsible for monitoring unresolved IT requests that prevent staff from completing registrations? Number 4, are there service standards or target response times for acknowledging emails and updating applicants whose registrations are delayed? Number 5, what formal process exists for property owners to seek review when repeated requests for information go unanswered? Number 6, in April 2026, I registered another newly completed unit, same property. The registration was completed within approximately 2 days. Using the same IMS system, could you please explain what has changed since then that now prevents staff from creating a new property address record? Number 7, has the Commission been informed of other registration delays caused by the IMS system? Number 8, what measures are being implemented to prevent similar delays in the future? Number 9, will this document be included on the meeting record? Hope yes. Number 10, considering the program annual budget and staff levels, What customer service standards does the Commission expect the rent program to meet the response times and communication with property owners? And finally, I would appreciate to distribute these to the commissioners and include it so it can be reviewed.
That's
Your
the
time
end
is
of
expired.
your time. Could you briefly, though, just repeat the date? You said at the very beginning, the date that you submitted your packet?
The day was exactly on May 29
Thank you.
of this year. It's in the package, it is the time.
I'll make sure they get that. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
The next speaker is Mary Ann Lim.
I'd actually like to speak in F4, which is now before H.
Okay, sure, no problem. That was the last speaker then. All right, the next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
I second.
Let's take a vote.
So we're approving the consent calendar excluding item F4, correct? Okay. Board Member Height,
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes with Board Member Espinoza and Vice Chair Cantor absent. Motion passes to approve item F1, F2, and F3. All right. We're moving on to item G1 under consideration of appeals. Item G1 is an appeal to petition number RC 25-T331, appellant / landlord, hereinafter landlord, appeals the hearing examiner's decision that awarded respondent / tenant hereinafter tenant $13,046.42. 1346.42 cents due to a decrease in housing services and awarded an ongoing reduction in the tenant's maximum allowable rent hereinafter MAR of $192.34. Specifically, the hearing examiner found that the landlord reduced the tenant's housing services by failing to properly repair and/or replace the tenant's broken refrigerator. The summation of the landlord's appeal challenges whether the record contains substantial evidence to warrant the hearing examiner's decision to award restitution and an ongoing rent reduction due to a decrease in services as it relates to the tenant's refrigerator. There are no speakers on this item. I'm sorry, correction. We have two speakers on item G1.
This is a landlord appeal to the hearing examiner's decision. For the record, please identify yourselves, state your name and your position on the case. We will start with the appellant and then the respondent.
So I'm going to ask the parties to please come to the front. The appellant will be on the left here, and the respondent will be on the right. And to turn on the microphone, there's a little button there.
Could you please identify yourselves with your name and your position, starting with appellant, then respondent?
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Sebastian Rivas, and I'm the appellant.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Imelda Barajas, and I'm the respondent.
Thank you. Before we begin, we'll go over a few appeal hearing procedures. First, the legal staff will give a summary of the case. Next, each party or their representative will have 7 minutes to address the board. Any party addressing the board who requires interpretation, the allowable times shall be doubled. Since there were no requests for interpretation from either party today, the time limits are as follows. Appellant starts first and will have 5 minutes to present your case on appeal. Next, respondent will be given 7 minutes to present your rebuttal. Finally, appellant will be given 2 additional minutes to close. Board has discretion to allow more time. As a reminder, this is not a de novo hearing, therefore no new evidence can be submitted. Anything said tonight should be based on the issue raised on appeal and exclusively on the record that was before the hearing examiner. Parties may discuss or comment upon legal matters in question and any other pertinent issue raised by the appeal. The board must disregard any discussion or comment regarding factual matters that were not in the record before the hearing examiner or officially noticed in the hearing documents. After all parties have spoken, the board will discuss and make a decision. We will now hear from legal staff.
Good evening, members of the Rent Board. Charles Oshanuga, General Counsel. I'm not going to go into great detail. You all read what I sent you all. Just broad descriptions. This matter concerns a refrigerator. It's a decrease in housing services. The tenant petitioned because after her 11-year-old refrigerator stopped working, at least the freezer portion of it, she contacted her landlord, who responded, sent out a technician. The technician advised the landlord, I suppose at that time, that there was a blockage in the drainage pipe, and the landlord communicated that to the tenant. The tenant then defrosted the refrigerator, and it still didn't fix the refrigerator. After much back and forth, and the landlord informing the tenant that she first had to pay a service fee of $100 before the technician would be sent out again, the tenant refused to pay. And then the landlord informed the tenant later on, as their conversations became more contentious, that if the technician came out and found an issue with the refrigerator, that issue would have been caused by her, because in the earlier inspection, the technician informed the landlord that it was the refrigerator was breaking due to user use. Now, the hearing examiner found those statements to be unreliable, as I described, so he disregarded the findings of the technician. The hearing examiner found that the refrigerator was broken not due to any fault of the tenant, and based on that, awarded the tenant restitution based on decrease in services of approximately $1,346 and some change. After a lot of back and forth between the landlord and the tenant informed the landlord, if you don't come, I'm not going to pay your service fee, and in fact, I'm going to petition to the rent board. As soon as, like around 10 minutes after receiving that message, the landlord relented and said, okay, I'll give you a replacement refrigerator. The tenant and the landlord tried to figure out the best time to inspect that refrigerator, but because of the work schedules didn't work out, the tenant had to go and inspect the refrigerator on her own, which apparently was in a parking lot. They can talk about that on their arguments. The tenant, after seeing the refrigerator, found it to be unacceptable and refused to accept the replacement refrigerator, which was used. The hearing examiner found that the replacement refrigerator was not comparable to the original refrigerator. And based on that, the hearing examiner found that replacement refrigerator did not comply with our laws, and the tenant had a right to refuse it. On appeal, amongst other things, the landlord argues that comparability is not a standard in determining whether or not a refrigerator is adequate. And as you read, that's a correct argument. There is no standard of comparability in our ordinance. The standard is adequacy. So my recommendation, as you all have seen, is to affirm the hearing examiner's findings that the refrigerator was broken, that it was not due to any of the tenant's fault. Thereby, the tenant is due some sort of restitution award. But in order to determine how much the tenant is owed, we need to first figure out whether or not the replacement refrigerator was sufficient or adequate. If the replacement refrigerator was adequate, then the tenant's damages restitution is cut off the day that she rejects the refrigerator. If the refrigerator is inadequate, then the restitution continues until the landlord replaces the refrigerator or repairs a broken one. The rent board is not a fact-finding board, it's a review board, so that fact of adequacy cannot be found by this board. My recommendation there is to send it back to the hearing examiner on that one sole issue with no testimony needed. The hearing examiner is to make a decision based on the record whether or not the tenant has demonstrated that the replacement refrigerator was inadequate. Finally, my recommendation, because this is a refrigerator case that's been going on for far too long, is to strongly encourage the parties to engage a hearing examiner for discussions of settlement, so hopefully the refrigerator can be fixed or replaced. Thank you.
Thank you, General Counsel. Are there any questions at this point or responses from members of the board? We'll now hear from the parties. Appellant will present first, then respondent. And a reminder, it's 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 2 minutes for rebuttal.
Good evening, Chair and members of the board. My name is Sebastian, and thank you for your time. I appreciate the legal staff's careful review of the record. I respectfully ask that the board adopt the legal staff's recommendation because it correctly concludes that the hearing examiner applied the wrong legal standard when evaluating the replacement refrigerator. And I have 3 main points. The tenant reported the issue on July 30th, 2025. A technician was sent out and inspected the refrigerator the next day.
We're just going to try and get your mic a little bit louder.
Yep. Closer? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to start over? Or? Okay. 2, there were good faith efforts that were made. You offered a replacement refrigerator. I made repeated attempts to reschedule installation, and the tenant declined the offered replacement before using it and declined other options to resolve the issue. The legal counsel mentioned that the refrigerator was in a parking lot, which is inaccurate. It was in a storage unit, which is in a parking lot. It's just not, it wasn't sitting outside the parking lot. And the correct legal standard, the ordinance requires an adequate housing service, not an identical or comparable refrigerator. This was a standard refrigerator, standard size. And neither refrigerator was measured, the replacement was never used or tested by the tenant, and the general counsel concluded the hearing examiner used the wrong standard. I respectfully request that the board adopt the legal staff's recommendation, affirm only the temporary reduction in service, reverse the monetary award and ongoing rent reduction, and remand the case for application of the correct legal standard. Thank you.
Respondent, go ahead.
Yes, so he offered. Oh, there we go. He offered the refrigerator after many back and forth, or much back and forth, like you guys mentioned, because we couldn't come to terms or agreement to drop off, which I hadn't seen the refrigerator before that. He went ahead and put it in the garage or in the storage unit in the parking lot. So then I took it upon myself to go see, because I had to bring this up apparently by myself. I'm a single mom. And so I would have to look for help. So I went to go check it out to see what I could do or what help I would need. And then I noticed it was much smaller than the one I already had. I need the space because I prepped for my grandpa and another person that I work for. So then I let him know, and it was moldy. To begin with, he had never even seen my refrigerator or that one. So then he couldn't compare, or he couldn't know if it was much bigger or smaller than the one I already had. So then that's when I mentioned to him that it was too small, that I needed one that was about the same size. I had contacted the rent board twice about it and asked their opinion about it. And here you guys mentioned that it should be not much smaller, but it should be about the same size and capacity-wise. So then that's when I went ahead and let him know that it was into the standards that it should, which is what it was written on there. And he said that it was a standard refrigerator. I don't know what that is. You know, that's not the one that was in my unit. And I was also told that it had to be about the same size, because that's what I'm paying for from when I went in there 11 years ago. So then I declined it, and after much back and forth, he finally replaced it. I think it was this April, but I had to put in a petition and go through all this hassle over a refrigerator, which I find kind of ridiculous.
Is that all? Yes, that's all. Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure. 2 minutes for rebuttal. Please proceed.
I don't really have much else to say. Like she said, there's a new refrigerator was installed, not the one that we originally suggested. A new one was purchased and installed, and here we are.
And that's all? Okay. Thank you, parties. Are there any questions or responses from members of the board?
I was just, out of curiosity, just to get a good timeline, when was the petition first filed that the hearing examiner conducted their process?
That's on page 2 of the recommendation. It's November 16th, 2025.
And could you also just say, because I'm also not seeing it in front of me currently, what's staff's recommendation right now?
So council's recommendation is to affirm the hearing examiner's findings that the tenant experienced a decrease in housing services due to a defective refrigerator. 2, reverse the hearing examiner's award of $1,346.42 and ongoing rent reduction of $192.34 as the hearing examiner failed to evaluate the claims under the correct standard. And 3, remand the matter back to the hearing examiner on the sole issue of whether the replacement refrigerator was inadequate. The hearing examiner is to rely solely on the record and is not permitted to rely on unreliable evidence as identified in the recommendation. Any potential restitution award must be appropriately confined to a period wherein the decrease in services occurred. Finally, prior to a potential remand decision being published, the parties are encouraged to meet with the hearing examiner for a settlement conference.
So just to simplify that, I'm just going to make a motion that we move staff's recommendation as you just dictated it.
Okay.
I second that.
All right, we had a motion by Board Member Willis and then a second by Chair Tipton. I'll take a vote. Board Member Height,
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
and Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes to, I guess, like you said, to accept staff, General Counsel's recommendation to affirm, reverse, and remand the decision. Just an announcement, we also, we didn't hear the public speakers.
Well,
We had 2.
were those not the parties?
No,
Sorry.
they noted here, G1.
Sorry, I thought that was the parties. I
Apologies.
misunderstood.
So how we do this?
You call the speakers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Call the speakers and we'll go
All
from
right,
there.
sorry about that.
And I wanted to just reiterate for the record that you just made, I believe staff's recommendation also encouraged the parties to reach out to the, was it the hearing examiner for?
Yes, it's in the
Yeah.
remand
mediation?
portion. It's in the remand portion of the,
Thank you.
When we hear from the speakers, then I'll explain a little bit about the decision to the parties.
Yes, okay, so we're gonna go over to, go on to the public speakers for item G1, and the first speaker is Elsa Stevens.
Should we have the parties go back?
They can stay.
Audience or
I think they can stay for now.
Stay where you are.
I apologize. I mistook this item for H1, and I convinced others to speak on G1, on G, because I thought it was the same
Okay, so
issue.
this is for item H1.
Yeah.
Okay,
That
so
actually works
correction,
very
we
well
had
for
no speakers for this item.
Perfect.
Okay, so the board moved to adopt my recommendation unchanged, which means to the parties that the hearing examiner's award is reversed down to 0, and so is the rent reduction. However, there will be an award in this case in favor of the tenant. The hearing examiner is to figure out how much the landlord owes the tenant, and in so doing, the hearing examiner has to figure out whether or not that replacement refrigerator was adequate. If it was adequate, then the damages, the restitution award is reduced from $1,346. It's going to represent a period in which when the tenant informed the landlord until the landlord offered that refrigerator replacement, which I think was from June to October or something of 2025. If the hearing examiner finds that the refrigerator was not adequate, then the tenant's award is going to be from June till when the new refrigerator was provided, which I think he said April of this year. So it's going to be several months differences, and that's what the hearing examiner is to figure out. Whatever the hearing examiner finds, both parties has a right to appeal. So it's the same process. If either party doesn't like what the hearing examiner finds, you can file an appeal, and you'll be right back here arguing why they made a mistake. Okay, thank you.
This concludes the appeal hearing. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right, sorry, I had to get myself together. So we're now moving to item F4. Item F4 is to receive a study session update on the continuing research and investigation conducted related to Regulation 202 and Resolution Number 19-01 rent program. There are four speakers on this item.
Okay. Oh,
Sorry, I wanted to clarify because I know we shifted things. This is F4 that we're doing now?
Yes, you said before
I just wanna
item
make sure.
H1, so this is item F4. So I guess you would just, the script, like, if it was a,
Thank you. We'll now hear the staff report.
Good evening, Chair Tipton and members of Rent Board, General Counsel Charles Shanuga. Just wanted to have this item pulled real fast to bring up, to bring two things to your attention. As the board has required, staff, namely Fred, the executive director, has been spending many hours putting these things together for your, for your edification, so that you all know the progress that we're making in terms of studying the Regulation 202, 204, and 1901. Fred and I have spent many days, weeks, whatever, since you've directed, namely every day, studying this issue and meeting with a lot of different owners. We've been having issues meeting with tenants for what they just refuse to meet with us. I suspect they've been told not to meet with us. I wanted to put that on the record first, because in order for this to be comprehensive, we're going to need to be able to meet with tenants. But before we get there, this is a very complicated issue. There's a lot of moving pieces, and there's a lot of things that the board must understand before they make any decision. I'll give you a really quick example. For Section 8, for instance, when your rent's limited to no more than 30% of your income, you have the overall rent amount, whatever that might be, right? Some FMR amount, fair market rental amounts. And let's just say that's at $2,000. There's a tenant portion to that rent, and then there's an owner portion to that rent, or the owner portion. And then there's the contract rent, and contract rent's the overall rent. If you are a tenant and you are under this program and you filed a petition and you were awarded a rent decrease, the decrease would not happen on the tenant portion of the rent, meaning, if the tenant pays $300 and the owner's portion is $1,700, the reduction would be towards the $1,700. The tenant would still pay the same amount. We couldn't fluctuate up and down the tenant's rent. That's one issue. So there's no actual rent relief from a petition that can be granted towards that where the tenant will feel directly that impact for habitability, for instance. That's the first issue. The second issue is restitution. As you've heard in this case, the principle of restitution is when you pay for housing services. Let's just say you pay $2,000. When a housing service is defective or decreased or broken, if you're still paying that same amount, the idea is you're overpaying rent, because that $2,000 portion the idea is that's for everything functioning. When something's not functioning, you should be paying a lower amount. But because you've been paying the same amount, you've been overpaying your rent. And that's, and under our law, that's unlawful, right? And so we order restitution. That damage is restitution, which is a legal word, which means it restores you to the position you would have been had you been provided the adequate services. In the case of a Section 8 tenant, and that, one last thing, that restitution amount is based on the difference of your maximum allowable rent, right, versus what you should have been paying. You find those differences. When you're dealing with a Section 8 tenant, their maximum allowable rent, let's just say it's $2,000, right? Because that's the contract rent. It would be the difference between what you're allowed to charge and what you've been collecting. If the landlord's only been collecting $300 from the tenant, I can't imagine a scenario where you're ever going to be entitled to restitution. And in future meetings, I'm going to paint this in much more detail so you can follow, and I'll give you all examples so you can follow it. But I just want to just put that in your mind, because this is a very complicated issue. If you're having trouble understanding it, and I'm doing a super high level picture of it, it gets more complicated as you get into the weeds. And then, if you reduce the rents, if you want an ongoing rent reduction, you have to coordinate with the housing authority and with HUD, and you can't. It's not a light switch where they, with the non-subsidized tenant, a landlord, we can just say, okay, rents go up, rents go down. When you're communicating with HUD, that's not how it works. And it takes several months to bring a rent down, it takes several months to bring a rent up. So there's those pieces, and we've spoken to Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, who's dealing with a similar situation, and they spent 18 months on this issue, and I think they're finally starting to launch their regulation of all subsidized units, but those are some issues to be aware of. My last point on this is, the owners have their perspectives. I'm sure the tenants have their perspective. I'm not going to be able to capture either side's perspectives adequately. So Fred and I were speaking after a meeting, I think, with RCD. I think their representatives here as well. But we were speaking with them. They suggested a working group kind of thing where you get stakeholders together from both sides in a room and they talk. And Oakland did something similar. We actually did something similar too when we actually passed the regulation. And that working group it was a whole year process. I don't think the board has afforded us that much time. So Fred and I have discussed this, and the reason I pulled this item is to request from you all, or maybe not to request, but just to inform you all that starting from next week, or the week after next, we're going to have multiple board meetings where we're inviting stakeholders from one at a time. So, landlord stakeholders, and we're going to afford them 30 minutes to present to the rent board these complicated issues to make sure that you all understand it and why they think it's not a good thing to do. And in the next board meeting, the tenants and their stakeholders and their representatives to do the same thing to make sure that everyone has a voice and that it's being communicated properly. It's going to take these are going to be several meetings over several weeks. So just FYI for all of you, so make sure you all have your schedule cleared. But but that's just the update I wanted to give on this particular item. You have anything, Fred? Okay, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions from members of the board? I just had a response generally. I really appreciate the suggestion, your suggestion of having the stakeholders at different meetings. I believe our plan was to vote on this issue at the regularly scheduled September meeting. Is that right? So it sounds like we are going to try and stick to that deadline, but it also sounds like realistically, given the challenges of getting a quorum, this could affect that deadline. So I guess we'll do our best to meet it and handle that as it comes, but I do think it's a really productive idea. And then I also just wanted to say thank you for the session update. I found it really helpful. In particular, I appreciated seeing that staff is reaching out to other cities. Obviously, Richmond is a city unto itself. It's not Berkeley, it's not Oakland, it's not Concord, but there's quite a bit of overlap in this issue, and I'm really interested in knowing what other jurisdictions have found and not reinventing the wheel. I'm particularly interested, I know there was a note in the update about Concord. I believe Concord is the city, correct me if this is wrong, that withdrew these exemptions and then reinstated them. Am I remembering that correctly? I'm particularly interested in that, just as a note. Board Member Willis?
Did you want an answer to your question before I ask mine?
I don't think I asked anything that needed an answer, but if I'm wrong about that, then
Sorry, I
feel
did your
free.
statement. It sounded like a question. That's why I was like waiting. Sorry.
Thank you for checking.
No, I guess the main question that I had, just to a previous comment you said that there's been unknown reasons for challenges to get a hold of tenants. So I guess I'm wondering what the strategy is, because if we're having a strategy of like, okay, these stakeholders first and then tenant stakeholders, and how are we going to make sure that enough tenant stakeholders are able to give input and not potentially have a silent room?
Yeah, so I don't think we're not having trouble getting hold of tenants. Tenants will, Mr. Tran can speak to this. Tenants would approach Mr. Tran and say, "Hey, can we speak with you?" And he'll follow up, and they are not contacting him back. It just feels like there's some kind of wall there, and you can speak to that if you want, Mr. Tran. But to answer the second part of your question, or maybe your main question, the strategy would be to contact first the stakeholders, or what we observe to be the stakeholders. So Bay Area Legal Aid, ACE, anyone else who puts themselves as a stakeholder who's vested interests in the outcome of the rescission of the regulation.
As a service provider, another group that came to mind would be Catholic Charities, just because I know they get an influx of folks seeking different services, so they may have a base of folks as well. Just came to mind as you were speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And any of our contractors that we have, EDC and projects that know, anyone who thinks this is a good thing for tenants.
Any further questions? Were there any public speakers on this issue?
Yes, we have 4.
Please call the public speakers.
Yes. The first speaker is Courtney Powell. You have 4 minutes to address the board.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair and board members. My name is Courtney Powell, and I'm speaking on behalf of Resources for Community Development, or RCD, as we're known in the field. RCD is a nonprofit affordable housing provider that creates and preserves homes for people with the fewest housing options. We operate more than 3,000 affordable rental homes across the Bay Area, including here in Richmond, Arbors Apartments, which provides 36 permanently affordable homes for families earning between 30 and 60% of AMI. As a mission-driven developer, we share the city's goals of promoting affordability and preventing displacement. However, we're concerned that rescinding Regulations 202 and 204 could have unintended consequences for affordable housing communities like ours, like the issues that the General Counsel described in the staff report that we've seen in other jurisdictions. We're asking the board to maintain that substantial compliance exemption for now and convene a working group to bring together affordable housing providers, regulatory agencies, and tenant advocates to develop a thoughtful policy solution. Our first concern with the proposed rescission of the regulations is really about the long-term financial sustainability of the city's affordable housing portfolio. Affordable housing is simply financed very differently than market rate housing. Nearly all of our operating revenue goes directly back into the building, into maintenance, into property operations, resident services, and long-term sustainability. Properties like Arbors were underwritten and financed based on modest increases that are allowed under the current housing framework, and public lenders, including the City of Richmond's Housing Department, participated in the structuring of those investments. The city already has oversight mechanisms in place for city-assisted affordable housing units, so those are not units that have Section 8 vouchers, but they're your typical LIHTC units that have some local public funding. All rents are reviewed through an existing process that allows for consideration of household income, rent burden, and operating needs. Replacing that flexible case-by-case approach with a fixed cap could produce less equitable outcomes, and I'll give an example of what I mean. Affordable housing providers have much more information about our tenants' incomes than market rate providers. Tenants have to self-certify their income every single year, so we know exactly how much each household makes. That allows us to tailor rent increase adjustments based on a family's actual situation. Some households see significant income growth after they enter stable housing. And for those households, we are able to size an increase so that their rent burden remains reasonable, while other households who are struggling may have lesser increases or no increase at all. The current system gives us the flexibility to make those distinctions. A flat cap might sound equitable, but in practice, it can reduce our ability to target that relief to the households that need it most. My second concern is that removing these exemptions can create conflicts with existing affordable housing regulations. And I think the staff report does a really good job of explaining some of those conflicts that have come up in other jurisdictions, like the conflict around Section 8 and contract rents that the General Counsel mentioned. I think we all share the same goals here. I think that there is a desire to come to the table and talk about policy solutions that can help accomplish all of those goals, both protecting tenants and also recognizing that affordable housing operates differently than market rate housing. Getting there will require thoughtful policy development rather than a blanket change that could have unintended consequences. And so we're asking the board to maintain the exemption while we look at forming a working group and do that work together. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to further conversations.
The next speaker is Elsa Stevens. You have 4 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. Elsa Stevens. I live at Heritage Park in Richmond. I'm so glad that the prior speaker spoke before me. Yes, I believe that there are housing providers that have goals similar to what the rent program has. Dignity, fairness, accessibility. But, and it's a large concern, I don't think that every city, town, community that has rent control on the planet ties the hands of do-gooders, people that try to provide housing for so many of us that are challenged. I don't think that undoing the harm that's been done is going to prevent good deeds from being done. My husband and I, last night and this morning, dug into 1901, 202, 204. I mean, we were reading it line by line to each other, trying to figure it out. Simply, very easily resolved. The community voted for rent control. They did not vote for exemptions. So that's something that needs to be looked at. This is what I originally wanted to say. March 18th, 2026, Board Member Willis motioned and was seconded by Board Member Espinoza to erase all exemptions granted to governmentally subsidized units. Instead, the Rent Board voted to study the matter further before acting. The government gives money and tax breaks to landlords who have convinced all of us that their goals are the same as the rent programs. And the rent program gave them privileges, exceptions, to encourage good stewardship and discourage bad actors. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that erasing rent control exemptions for affordable and low-income properties, and not all of them are Section 8, would instantly give full rent control protection to hundreds of Richmond renters. Giving bad landlords 60 days to clean up 8 years of tenant abuse is neither just nor practical. Costa-Hawkins denies our complex rent control protection. Our building is too new. Heritage Park Senior Complex negotiated a 12% hike in 2018 down to 3% thanks to pressure from the exempted landlords. Since then, our rent has gone up only occasionally and only 5%, but those increases have priced several of our neighbors out. Will erasing exemptions inflict free market rent hikes? I don't think so. Fear of losing government money and tax breaks should encourage our landlord to negotiate. People over 55 are the largest percentage. I cut myself off.
That's
Your
the
time
end of
expired.
time.
I'm sorry?
Your time expired.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Verna Cosby Smith. You have 4 minutes to address the board.
Thank you for having us present to the board. My name is Verna Cosby Smith. I represent Community Housing Development Corporation, located in North Richmond. Its portfolio includes 11 properties in the city limits of Richmond, and it is Richmond and North Richmond that is this organization's core purpose in life. We have to look at our entire portfolio as a collective that funds our organization's activities, which include senior housing, housing for people with special needs, housing that targets people below 60, between 30 and 60% AMI, actually 20, 60% AMI. Some of the properties make a little money. Some of the properties don't break even. And collectively, the portfolio, we use one property to help fund and take care of the other. Because structurally, with the rents that are regulated from all of our funders and other resources, including their Section 8, including our HUD properties, including our 202s and 811s, and you name it with the acronyms, our rents are really targeted to make sure our tenants aren't rent burdened. They are also really targeted to make sure we can cover our cost and maintain the properties. The additional burden of rent control that may leave us in a position to not be able to raise rents using resources that do not come from the tenants, but come from our funding sources like HUD or Section 8, would leave us in an inability to properly, continually, sustainably maintain the buildings, which is exactly what you want us to do. So I really appreciate the introduction that Ms. Courtney Powell gave you. She's one of our peers in the industry. It is also, everything she said is part of what we have to deal with. And what I want to make sure you understand is if we can't take our properties collectively, join the returns from all of them to make sure we can cover and maintain our properties well as the other home ownership programs, credit counseling programs, EV assistance acquisition programs, and buy, build, and develop new housing opportunities, will be the end result that you're not really looking for, one of the unintended consequences that she mentioned. So consider that as we move forward. We look forward to doing whatever we can to make sure the board understands what we can and can't do and how this will not deliver for you what you're really looking for, which is sustainable, affordable housing for residents in this community and be able to increase that number as well. And that would be it for me.
Thank you. And the last speaker is Mary Ann Lim. You have 4 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and board members. My name's Mary Ann Lim, and I'm here on behalf of EAH Housing. EAH is a nonprofit affordable housing developer with communities across California and Hawaii, and we're here today urging you to reconsider the potential rescission of regulations 202 and 204. With more than 80 communities across the 9 Bay Area counties serving seniors, low-income families, people exiting homelessness, veterans, and transitional age youth, we know how important it is to house our most vulnerable neighbors. Here in Richmond, we operate Nevin Plaza, a 138-unit senior and special needs community, and Crescent Park, a 378-unit family community. For decades, we've been responsible community partners, even sourcing millions of dollars to fund rehabilitation projects at our properties, precisely because we share this board's commitment to housing stability. However, we're concerned that rescinding these regulations could jeopardize that work. As a mission-driven nonprofit, we share the city's goals of improving affordability and preventing displacement, but these projects can only get done when we have the cash flow to support them. That's exactly why we're concerned about these rescissions. Regulations 202 and 204 currently provide a partial exemption for government subsidized units conditioned on substantial compliance. That exemption exists because our rents aren't set unilaterally. They're set by federally mandated formulas administered by HUD. At Crescent Park alone, 343 of our 378 units carry project-based Section 8 subsidies. Removing this exemption could leave EAH and other providers like us caught between local rent caps and binding federal contracts, unable to comply with both at once. This isn't hypothetical. Crescent Park recently needed a HUD-approved rent increase of more than 30%, which would be fully funded by federal subsidy, not paid by the tenants. The tenants would still pay 30% of their income. I might add also that, the rent increase is being awarded due to the need to finance urgent repairs for failed sewer systems on a over 50-year-old property. Without the ability to increase the HAP contract rent, we wouldn't be able to do the repairs. At Nevin Plaza, these financial changes also carry the same underlying risk. The acquisition of the property from the Richmond Housing Authority, we were able to do over $44 million in rehab at the property. But, the property was financed through a complex stack of public and private capital. Disrupting that framework of how rents are increased could put the long-term viability of that affordable housing that this city has already invested in at risk. In closing, we want to be clear, we are not asking you to retreat on tenant protections. What we're asking for is partnership and compromise. Broad blanket changes like removing this exemption entirely would only create problems that would take years to undo while residents bear the cost in the meantime. We respectfully—
Your time expired.
That's your time.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you. That was the last speaker on this item.
Is there a motion?
You don't have to make
It
a
was on the
motion.
consent calendar, so I think the only motion would be to receive it.
And you've already received it, so that's okay.
We're good.
I was a little confused too. I was like, wait.
I guess we'll
That's the thing,
begin.
yeah, that's the thing when we move it from consent.
Okay.
Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is item H1 under study session. Item H1 is to receive and update and evaluate Monterey Pines Apartments compliance and as it relates to staff's investigation under Regulation 204. There are 5 speakers on this item.
Thank you. We'll now hear the staff report.
Good evening, Chair Tipton and members of the Rent Board. I'm Fred Tran, the Executive Director of the Rent Program. And tonight I will be presenting on Monterey Pines compliance with Regulation 202. At the last regular Rent Board meeting, staff was directed to return this month with an agendized item to update, evaluate, and discuss the compliance of Monterey Pines as it relates to their existing exemption granted pursuant to Regulation 202. There is no fiscal impact related to this item. And the background. At the February and March meetings, during the public forums, the residents from Monterey Pines had criticized property management and owners of delayed maintenance, habitability issues, and increased utility charges. And tonight, staff will be providing a brief history and the latest update on the property for the rep board to evaluate and discuss the next steps. The apartment complex is comprised of 324 rental units with 3 different government subsidies. There's approximately 251 low-income housing tax credit units, or LIHTC, and these are rent restricted. The city's residential rental inspection program, or RRIP, administers the inspection of these units, and a company called Outsource It is a third-party vendor that conducts the actual inspections, and they will provide reports to the city, the rent program, and the owners of the property. The remaining 73 units are either housing choice vouchers, which is a tenant-based program, or a project-based voucher, which is a unit-based program. And the Housing Authority of Contra Costa County conducts the inspections for these units. Inspections were completed in late March for the LIHTC units, which resulted in 84 units in compliance. 162 had some type of code compliance, and 5 were considered first fail. The progress of the repairs completed from March to June resulted in 102 units being in compliance. In mid-June, re-inspections were completed, and the results were 186 units in compliance, 60 had a code compliance, and 5 still remained at first fail. The latest information for those 65 units that are awaiting re-inspection is that 21 units have cleared internally and are waiting for re-inspection. 44 units are in process of repairs, and 8 of those units are still having issues with accessing the units. Approximately 40 of those units, of those 44 units, are needing repairs due to a heater issue, and there's a current vendor delay on the parts. This morning, staff met with the Housing Authority of Contra Costa County, the ownership group, and the city to receive an update on the housing choice voucher and project-based voucher inspections. Approximately 40 of the units had failed the first inspection, and that was mainly due to hard wiring of the smoke detectors. And there were a few units with infestation or issues with the refrigerator seals. The inspections were conducted by the Housing Authority, and they had noted that their inspections are more focused on health and safety, but also if they fail the city's code enforcement, they'll automatically fail the Housing Authority's inspection. The actions taken. On March 30th, the REP program sent a compliance letter in conjunction with the March 26 RRIP discrepancy report sent to the ownership group. And in early April, the ownership group sent a letter to the residents concerning the delayed maintenance, ongoing habitability issues, safety, and a credit for the utility charge. And ownership also informed the program that they did hire an asset manager to try to ramp up their repairs. On mid-June, June 15th, the RRIP provided the re-inspection report of the LIHTC units with the details of the outstanding deficiencies to the ownership group and to the city. And July 15th, we did have the check-in meeting this morning with the Housing Authority to review the inspections. And, we're here today primarily for this agendized item to discuss how the board wants to proceed next. Regulation 202 considerations. Regulation 204 is a mechanism to remove an exemption that has been granted under Regulation 202 if an owner fails to comply with the requirements under Section A of 204. 60 calendar days were provided as of the March 30th letter sent by the rent program with the specific obligations identified from the March 26th inspection report. And today is the next regular scheduled rent board meeting to agendize an item for discussion. As of this morning's report, in total, approximately 75% of the units are in compliance, and roughly 25% still have a code violation. Re-inspection by the Housing Authority is currently scheduled for July 20th and August 6th. And the next inspection for the LIHTC units is scheduled for July 23rd and August 17th. The requirements for the LIHTC units is prior to 2025, they actually weren't required by the residential rental inspection program. There was an ordinance where due to some prior failings, the city had decided to pass an ordinance to have the rental inspection program inspect those LIHTC units going forward. Regarding the rent program's compliance requirements, the ownership group has enrolled the property with the program. They've paid the outstanding fees for fiscal year 25-26. We just mailed the invoice for 26 and 27, and they have until the end of this month to pay that balance. And they have provided the rent rolls on time when we had made the original request in March. And finally, with petitions for rent credits, they do become effective once the unit is subject to the rent control provision of an ordinance. And recommended action is to receive an update and evaluate Monterey Pines Apartments compliance as it relates to staff's investigation under Regulation 204. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation again. And I know I talked briefly a little bit with staff on background here and there as I've been hearing about this. So I know how I intended on motioning it the last time because I've just been, disturbed about what I've been hearing, and also growing up in Richmond, it's not the first time I've heard about stuff even before sitting in any office. So I'm wondering, what are the options before the board today and what we could do? Are we only able to receive a presentation and give potential directions for like a next meeting, or like what are our options today with 202 and 204 as it relates to this specific issue?
Yeah, that's correct. The option today is just to receive, and you can ask questions as it relates to the presentation, but if you wanted to move, for instance, to rescind, that would have to be on a later board meeting that you can schedule. And it would be likely to be a hearing, a public hearing, so that the other side would have an opportunity to, argue why it shouldn't be rescinded.
Can I clarify that? There's the rescission in general of 202 and 204, and then as to this specific property, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have clarified.
No,
If
it's
you want,
okay.
yes.
We can't do that today.
So today you're just receiving this update. We went back, Fred and I, we went back to to watch the meeting of last month, I think, when Board Member Willis made the motion to make sure we captured the motion accurately. And this was the language that Board Member Willis used. And you're just here to receive an update and talk about the compliance of Monterey Pines. If you want to move forward, for instance, with the rescission under 204, you'd have to agendize that again, which we can do. And recall from the prior item, I informed you all we're going to be having very frequent meetings, so you can just throw that on one of the meetings if you wanted to. But yes, it would be a public hearing where the other side would get an opportunity to respond and all that stuff.
I promise I wouldn't be loquacious. And the other question that I had, because I know when I was checking in on background, it was my understanding that, and it seems today, based on the information provided from like the code enforcement reports, are they still out of compliance with the repairs that need to be done?
They are. It's, as of now, if you combine both the LIHTCs and the inspections from the county, it's approximately 75 are in compliance, 25% out of compliance.
Okay. No more questions. Thank you.
If I could just I'm sorry, if I can just clarify one thing. Emily, can you go back one slide? Regardless of what you all do, in the future meetings, I think this last bullet point's an important one, and I just want to make sure you all understand it. It says petitions for rent credit effective on the date unit subject to rent control. So if you were to either rescind Monterey Pines exemption at a later meeting or everyone's exemption, the tenants can file a petition obviously now, but they wouldn't be able to receive any restitution award during the periods in which they were exempted from rent control. So it would be an ongoing basis. So it's good to have that on the record because some of them might think that they could get, it's not a retroactive thing, it goes forward.
And that actually brought up another question for me because and that's part of the reason why I asked the previous question on our first item. When a hearing examiner gets a petition, how long does that process in ballpark take to do the petition, the process, and then make a determination?
Probably better for the board clerk because that's where she resides most of the time.
Hello. Well, the way it works is once it's submitted, it has to go through a process to review to make sure it's complete. So usually that typically takes about 5 to 10 days, depending on how many petitions we have. It's reviewed. If it's deemed complete, then it will move forward to the objection process, which the objector has 21 days to object. It's calendar days, right? Mm-hmm. Calendar days. I always get that confusing. Calendar days to object. Once we receive the objection or the objection period passes, then we will schedule it for a hearing. It just depends on how booked out we are. For example, now we're booked out for August. So we're booking in August, almost at the end of August. So it can take a while. And then once parties come to the hearing, once we get the objection or once the period passes, we'll send out a notice of settlement. I don't know if will be settlement conference and hearing for them too? Mm-hmm. Okay, they will receive a notice of settlement conference and hearing. And then once they come to the hearing, then parties have the opportunity to either settle or will go into a hearing, which means they'll be sworn in, they'll be on the record, and so forth. If it is settled, the hearing examiner tends to write a settlement right then and there. Sometimes he would have to continue for further settlement discussions. And if it is settled and he writes up a settlement, agreement, parties sign, and it's over. But if they don't agree to a settlement, then they will have to go to a decision. And then that's when it can take some time. He normally takes about 2 or 3 months, depending on how many cases he has. And then remember, once he issue out the decision, parties have 35 days to appeal. So we have to wait on that deadline to pass. And then if it's not appealed, then his decision is there.
So
Yeah.
it sounds like 2 to 6 months, depending on who does what during that process.
And the complexity of the claims. But let me, just using the prior matter as an example, and as you referenced, the petitioner that was the respondent in that last case, they filed on November 16th. So it also depends when you file, because it's kind of close to the holidays.
Correct.
So they filed it November 16th, and then we received the landlord's response January 7th. All right. And then we set the hearing for February 5th, so that's a month later, and it was heard February 5th, same day, and the decision was issued in March. So a month later, the decision went out. Then, as Ms. Shaw said, you have 35 days to appeal, and it was appealed in April, a month later. And then from April till now it's finally heard when we're in August, July? I don't know where we are. July?
July.
Yeah, July.
We're in July. And part of that delay too was the Monterey Pines issue and the other issue, because I was going to have it on the calendar earlier, but we got sidetracked with all this stuff. So it just really depends.
And it depends on how many cases.
But the regulation does say specifically, I believe, it cannot exceed more than 180 days.
Right.
So that's the longest you can go without a decision.
Correct.
No, thank you, because of all this petition process, I've never asked, like, what's the general timeline, so I just want to understand that. Thank you.
I just had some sort of observations and comments. First of all, thank you for the update. It's really helpful. I'm heartened to see that there has been, it looks like, some measure of real progress that's been made, and that's what we would hope from this process. It's not lost on me, however, and I'm sure it's not lost on any of us, that 60 days has come and gone almost twice now. And so I misunderstood the agenda item. I understood evaluate to mean that we would be making this decision tonight, but I'm a little bit glad that we aren't. Not because I want to keep kicking the can down the road, because like I said, that 60 days has come and gone almost twice, but because I do feel like I'm operating in a little bit of a vacuum that I don't love. So this is a question for General Counsel. Would it be possible to prepare a memo for the board by the next meeting? Specifically, I assume there's some legal background on what substantial compliance actually means under the law, and I think that's the language from the regulation. I would really appreciate some research and guidance on what substantial compliance means, and if appropriate, your evaluation of the record before us with respect to the legal definition of substantial compliance.
I can, to your first question, absolutely, I can do that, and I can do it fast. To the second question, we can speak offline about that, because I can give guidance for sure, but if I'm assuming at our next meeting, you're all going to want to have some kind of public hearing where you're going to either rescind or decide they're in substantial compliance or something of that matter. I can give you guidance. Yes, I will say yes on both. Yes to both questions.
And understanding that the final decision is the board's, but
Yes.
Guidance would be helpful.
Yes.
Seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers.
Sure. The first speaker is Meredith Esseray. We have 5. And you have 4 minutes to address the board.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Meredith Essery. I am with ownership of Monterey Pines with MRK Partners. We are a mission-driven affordable housing developer based in Los Angeles. We have owned Monterey Pines since 2017. We put in $25 million at that time to renovate the project. While we understand the importance of maintaining the property, a certain level of trust is put into our third-party management companies for these day-to-day operations on the projects and the identification of necessary maintenance needs. When the City of Richmond made the decision to reach out to ownership directly, the approach and the engagement changed drastically. And Chairperson Tipton, I appreciate that you noticed. We have engaged in biweekly meetings with the Housing Authority, the Rent Board, at times the city mayor, and various stakeholders to ensure that we continue to move this project forward. Since March, we have directly addressed and cleared hundreds of identified issues, and as Fred mentioned earlier, are down to the final 65. I do want to note the heater issues are typically resolved in the fall prior to the winter season. I also want to note some of the other units that we use the term fail compliance can be related to smoke detectors that have been removed by residents, key locks put on bedroom doors, or carpet that may have been ripped by wear and tear. Sometimes we are not notified of those issues until our annual walks occur. I am confident that we will pass inspection on the dates that Mr. Tran mentioned earlier that are in early August. We have chosen to work in affordable housing because we do care about housing access for our tenants. But as other developers mentioned earlier, the reality of maintaining affordable housing is getting increasingly challenging. Rent revenue, our primary means for generating funds for these projects, is not keeping up with wage increases and inflation, and it impacts everything from the cost of our front desk staffer to a toilet stopper. Notably, costs of these things within the city's control that directly impact our housing costs, like utilities and even trash removal, continue to rise year over year without proportionate increases in rent. Affordable housing is just one of the few industries where revenue is capped at the beginning of the transaction. Our residents' incomes are regulated and our compliance is audited annually with permanent recorded requirements for ongoing affordability for decades. These buildings have budgets that cannot allow for drastic changes in expense, but over the last 5 years, we've been forced to adjust. We are concerned about the impact of the agenda item that presents challenges to the sustainability of affordable housing here in Richmond now and into the future. As such, in this present environment, a property like Monterey Pines is set to lose substantial money this year and has for the past 2. We continue to invest our own dollars to fix these issues because we care and we want to make it right. Look, I understand landlords and property owners aren't sympathetic actors, and I'm not trying to paint us as such. But we are really key and vital partners to ensuring that Richmond has affordable and respectable housing where residents of all income levels can live and thrive. As a partner, we are committed to maintaining our current engagement level and will continue to work diligently not to just address the existing issues, but also the systemic ones and ongoing compliance with legal requirements. We also continue to promise to stay engaged with the city, the Housing Authority, and other stakeholders in the process. We ask that the Richmond Rent Board similarly recognize its important role as a partner and ensure that these affordable housing units are sustainable through review and regulation. We're very supportive of the working group and the plans that have been outlaid today for engagement with landlords and with residents.
That's the end of time. Thank you.
All right, the next speaker is Jesus Valencia. He's still here? Jesus? Okay. Charmina Guerrero? You still here? Yeah. Okay. And you have 4 minutes to address the board.
Hi, I'm Charmina. I'm a resident of Monterey Pines Apartments. I've lived there for 14 years. When I moved to Monterey Pines Apartments with my 5-year-old son at the time, everything was okay. I know my neighbors had roaches, but my unit, thankfully, I did not. It wasn't until about 2 years ago that everything seemed to just go downhill at Monterey Pines. I still don't know what the reason is. Management, of course, ownership, of course, has a lot to do with it. I just was doing calculations because, as you guys might have seen on the thing on the TV, the recap, they were charging us bills, right, for utilities. For example, I got a bill for $72.70. That's just a portion of the bill for sewage. Now, if you times that by 251 units, I'm a 2-bedroom unit. There's also 3-bedroom units, and they would be even charged more. That's $18,247 they're charging us a month for sewage alone. Now, it's $124.62 they were charging me for water. And I know my neighbors too, because we all talked about this. There was like 50 of us. We were comparing the bills and stuff. So again, if it was $72.70 for the sewage for 251 units, and there are some units that are more because they're 3 bedrooms, and there's probably some units that don't have to pay because I've heard that too. That was $18,000 a month for sewage. It seems ridiculous. The water would be even more because they're charging $124 a month. And then there was also another for the garbage, $49. So I just thought that that was astronomical amounts to for their billing. I don't think the trash costs that much. I don't really know, but that's something you guys need to look into. Thankfully, because of you guys and because of other members, other tenants standing up and saying this is not right, we did get a refund in May for all the things that, all the bills that we had paid starting, I think, in November. So thank you for that. I want to mention the inspections. They do not come at the appointed time, so we as tenants cannot tell them that we have mice and roaches. We cannot tell them that our carpet, we have our own carpet on the carpet, that my carpet's 14 plus years old. They don't care. They do not do the annual inspections every year to check your units or to check your, I don't show them my pay stubs or nothing. They just have me come in, sign a form, and that's it. In the beginning, the first 5 years, they would have us go through all our pay stubs, everything. So they don't do what they're supposed to do. But what they do on the 5th, trust me, you're getting a notice saying that your rent is due and you need to pay a $50 late fee. I haven't never got that for me not paying my rent, but I've got it on them by accident. They messed up and said I didn't pay my rent, but I did. And I've talked to my neighbors. We've seen them on their doors too. That's what they're there for. They're just there to collect a payment. And I think it's really sad that they come off like they're doing their job when they're not. I still have mice in my bedroom, in my kitchen. I have notified them back in March, showed them pictures. I notified them actually, I wrote it down. Dang, I don't have enough time. 5 times. They did nothing. They don't even have an exterminator. My neighbor has roaches. She's an immaculate, clean person. They do not care about the tenants. All they care about is the paycheck, and it's really sad. Please consider Monterey Pines, find them. Do what you need to do. Thank you for my time.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Elsa Stevens. You have 4 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. Well, what I meant to say last time, and I ran out of time, I'm hoping that if all exemptions are nullified, that our landlord will be concerned about not losing their government money and tax breaks for providing seniors with affordable housing. People over 55 are the largest percentage of the first-time unhoused. Retirements don't keep up with inflation as we become less and less employable with age. So we must continue to organize and negotiate exemptions or no exemptions. It just seems to me that bad actors like Monterey Pines should not put good actors at risk of losing their projects. Monterey Pines is a business. The other providers are more like a charity project. It bothers me that anyone would consider 25% of over 300 units not being in compliance after months is okay, acceptable. And then the 4 months that it would take to punish the bad actor and remove the privileges given to them by this body in trust would take 4 months. And people have been living in hell because of these people. And that's something that regular market share apartment complexes do. They, long-term tenants are put in hell, put through the horrible experiences, so they'll go away, and then they can bring in new people at higher rents. It's evil, it's calculated, it's not an accident, it's not normal, and it's organizations, organized crime organizations like that. This is why the Rent Board was created. So thank you for looking into it, and I trust you're going to do everything necessary.
And the last speaker, I hope I pronounced this right, Asara Hernandez? Asara Hernandez? Okay, I guess she's not present. Then that was the last speaker.
Is there a motion?
Before you make a motion, I apologize. You might want to include in your motion, whatever language you use, the word, remove or rescission of the, if that's what you want for the next meeting. And also when you want us to bring it back, in a week or two or at the next regular meeting. I anticipate a meeting before the regular meeting. So if you wanted the item to come back before the regular meeting, you can just say sometime before the regular meeting, and then we can figure out the schedule from there. Does that make sense?
It does. I'd like to, we'd have to vote on this. My preference would be, that we make this evaluation as a board sooner than later, but it is important to me to get what I had asked for, guidance from you, and so I want to make sure we are giving you a realistic timeline to get that information to us before we have to make this evaluation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And you don't have to include your request for guidance. I know it, so that's fine. And
Can we just schedule a closed session ahead of time if there's any other questions that comes up?
We couldn't, because it wouldn't qualify under you need certain factors to be present for a closed session to be justified.
Things are different here.
But as long as you give me a week, I can get it done relatively fast. So, as long as it's not like tomorrow or something, Oh. But they're not doing that. This is if we schedule it. Yeah. So at least a week, and I'm fine. And this is obviously one last thing. I wouldn't state a specific day. Just state not at the next, before the next regularly scheduled meeting, because Mrs. Shaw has to look for open available rooms and all that stuff. So we don't know exactly what date it would be, but we would strive for it to be before the next regular meeting.
I just have a quick question. So the next item is scheduling. Does that coincide with this? Because the next item is called scheduling.
No,
That's
because
something separate?
it's something separate, yeah.
I would move to receive an update and evaluate Monterey Pines compliance as it relates to staff's investigation under Regulation 204, and for the board to decide, what's the wording that I should use here? To decide on whether to withdraw Monterey Pines exemption under Regulation 204 at either the next regularly scheduled meeting or a specially scheduled meeting, whichever comes sooner.
I'll second that.
Okay, so you said at the next scheduled meeting, or what did you say, the rest?
It would be at the next scheduled meeting, whether
Or
whether
whichever sooner,
regularly
okay.
scheduled or special, yeah. At our next opportunity.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. All right, and that was by Chair Tipton, and the second was by Board Member Willis? Okay, I'll take a vote. Board Member Height,
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
and Chair Tipton?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes with Board Member Espinoza and Vice Chair Cantor absent. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item I under scheduling.
I don't have any items for scheduling.
So check our email.
Yeah, check your email, please.
Please check your email.
We will work on what we just spoke about, though, and I'll make sure that we expedite it.
Okay, so no items under scheduling. Okay. All right. Then
We usually have staff reports. Do we have staff reports
we changed
today?
it
Okay.
to scheduling.
I love that for us. Meeting adjourned at 6:40.
Thank you.